taught me nice. Ain't about winning, don't talk to me twice. I don't play dice, I'll make a move on the board, it's precise. The fuck is the price? I took a fiddle and dipped it in ice. I took a call.
Hey, we back. We got another special episode of Rap Roll Pod with your boy Buck. It's my first virtual episode, but I feel like it's very appropriate. We all can't be in the same place at the same time. So today I'm joined by none other than LJ Dawson from the Outlaw Report. I know y'all familiar with her. If y'all been on social, if y'all subscribe to the newsletter, she's very tapped in with the local news. I guess you could say she keeps us up to be on a lot of the things that's going on in the city and surrounding areas. LJ, if you want to give the people a quick backstory or introduction for those that's not familiar with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Buck. I'm really excited we finally got to coordinate this, and I'm also grateful you did virtual as well. I feel special as the first virtual guest. But yeah, so I'm the editor-in-chief of the DMV's only cannabis news outlet. We're independent. We cover DC, Virginia, and Maryland, but obviously there's been so much going on in DC. We're originally based in DC too, so that's what we focus on. And we offer a couple things for the people. We offer a newsletter weekly that's going to give you the updates on the whole tri-state. I know it's technically a district in DC, but the whole area, and then also some national
Right.
news. But we really do our best to just keep you guys updated on the policy information, the meetings that are coming out, because I know y'all don't have time to dig through the government websites. That's what I come in and do. That's why people support us, is because I get to spend hours following meeting dispositions and making spreadsheets and also talking to the people on both sides of the traditional, the legal market, and just really trying to keep up to date on the biggest things that are impacting everyone from the patients to the business owners to shoppers, basically.
Yeah. And how time consuming is that? Because you just said you got to go through all of the bills. You gotta basically investigate what's happening and be in the loop of things as they're happening. Like how time consuming, how energy consuming is that to be like on top of all of those dirt? Because there's a lot going on right now, obviously.
Yeah, basically, I don't have enough time in the day, Buck. So my life boundaries, where I'm like, I gotta check out, are when it stops. So I mean, like the cannabis scene is so ever evolving. It's hard to keep up
Yes.
with it, even from any position, right? And to be in my position where I'm not only trying to keep up with every aspect, but I'm trying to like verify and find the truth of every aspect. It is incredibly time
Yeah.
consuming. But that's why I'm here. I'm here because I'm the person calling the regulators. I'm the person going through the PDFs and the documents, open records requesting information. Um,
Mm,
a lot of the stuff that gets published is like, I always say 10% of what actually I'm hearing about. So my role as
yeah.
a journalist is sometimes just to hear like that crazy rumor. And I hear it from three different people, and then I go try to figure out if it's true or not. And a lot of times you won't ever see an article about it because I've gone around and I've figured out, okay, it's not true, right?
That
So
was,
some of
yeah,
the
that
work,
was some bull.
yeah, some of the work you don't even like end up seeing it. But that's my role, to try to hold some accountability, not only to just the legislators and like the regulators and the enforcement, the police officers, but also to hold accountability to our community that likes to talk a lot.
Oh, shit. It froze up a little bit.
Yeah, it should do on this one. It should do independent recording, so you should not freeze on your side, and then it'll upload mine independently, but it might be a little weird if we have to cut it, if that
Gotcha.
makes any sense. But yeah.
Yeah, we back now. But yeah, you saying that the enforcement they work on behalf of the citizen. So you got to keep them accountable for the things that you don't want to see in the space, right? And that's another like it's like old school journalism.
Yes,
You know
sir.
what I'm saying? It's old
Yeah.
school journalism. That's very very refreshing, actually. You know what I mean? because now it's like everything is like so bloggy.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily being verified. People are just, thinking and saying. So like to see old school journalism in a space like cannabis that was like shunned, it wasn't even a space, so to speak. That shit is refreshing. I don't care what nobody got to say about it. You know what I'm saying? I know it's very taxing on you, but I feel like it's gonna pay off. Because the space is gonna be ever evolving, and it's a very,
Mhm.
interesting space, so to speak. It's like enforcement. We were just talking about enforcement. There's a lot of enforcement going on now, and there's and that's because we moved past the placard phase
Mhm.
of the DC space. So for those that's like really not overly familiar with the history of how we even got to this point, we can give them a little bit of. I mean, most of the people watching probably are if they're local, but there are people that's going to be abroad from somewhere else that don't really understand our market. So we can kind of like give them a little bit of a refresher on what it is that we're dealing with. I-71 was voted on by the residents in what 2015 or 14. I want to say, I want to
Around
say,
then, yeah, yeah. I don't have my notes in front of me, but yeah, it was voted on some years ago, right? Yeah, some years
yeah,
ago, and it was right after, if I'm not mistaken, the medical DC medical program was implemented, which was
started right.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, whatever year Colorado and all of them went legal, it was around that time. So that I-71 market allowed residents to grow up to 12 plants, I believe, and gift up to 1 ounce to someone over the age of 21 without without monetary attachments, or they could barter basically. And then that became an industry for the storefronts that became, buy a sticker, get some flour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And because of the way it was written, that actually just kind of got away from itself for a good amount of years, to where it affected the medical market, that they actually had licensees. All that money was going to the I-71 market, which was loopholeish, to say the least.
Hmm.
And that caused a back and forth between like the people who were actually paying taxes and doing the business through the city, and then the actual storefronts, which is also tied into these lawsuits later on down the line. But nonetheless, they started to uh, complain to city officials that this isn't fair. We need to fix this, more or less, which is kind of where we're at now, with
Hmm.
them rewriting the I-71 loophole out of the city legislature, I believe, so whereas everybody had a chance to convert to actually become actual medical license.
Yeah, absolutely, Buck. Yeah. So yeah, we went through this like golden age of I-71. I would refer to it as, and that was really right after it got passed. When
Yeah,
there were
shit was lit.
local businesses. I mean, this is like OG weed community businesses who were like, oh, we can kind of use this to gift weed. And there were businesses that were really legitimately just gifting an eighth, like
Yeah,
they were not trapping out of a loophole, which we saw later on. And so these
yeah,
businesses were like, this is great, and this is back, like, I think it's important to give a context. Like, this is back, I don't want to say back in the day, right? But this was when DC was a really important cornerstone of the weed culture, right? Like, this was when it was where a lot of the just people were coming. There was a huge underground scene here. And that I-71 culture like encouraged that to really grow here. And there was a really strong community of that in DC. And so after that happened, though, there was still some raids going on. There was still some enforcement, right? Like the feds were still up some people's, business. But
yeah.
after that happened, there was this like kind of when California started getting a little sketchy, I think there was an influx of, I would call them foreign operators. Like this is not Maryland or Virginia people. This was like big scale trappers, sometimes dispos out of the Cali scene, out of later on the Oklahoma scene, who came
Mm-hmm.
into DC and were like, oh, we can get off packs like this
Yeah.
way. And this was not like necessarily grown out of DC weed culture. This wasn't grown
Mm-hmm.
out of legacy growers here or Maryland, right? Like this was
Right.
intruders who
So,
saw a way to make a buck.
nope.
This was like the new kids, right? Um,
Yeah.
and that was unfortunate in a lot of ways. But they came in and they started these shops that we, I think, see, not all of them, but a lot of the shops that we ended up seeing as like I-71 shops, right? Where they were not really holding to the gifting anymore. They were really just like trapping out of these shops and they were making millions. Like this was like they were making a ton of money. And you're right, like the medical market at some point was like, we need help here. Like, this is taking away from our business. But it also was the city, I think, kind of acknowledging, like, we've let this run away so much that it is now an industry. Like, these people had
Yeah.
lobbyists now. Like, this industry had lobbyists that was talking to the mayor, that was talking to council members. And so in 2022, they passed this expansion of the medical program. And I think it's important to remind everyone because of the federal legislation and because of DC not being a state, we can't actually set up our own recreational market. And so
Right.
that's why everyone needs to know that. So that's why we're behind Maryland. We'll probably be behind Virginia when they get their act together. And so they had to finesse this like as close as they could to a retail market. And part of that, which is
Yeah.
interesting, which no one else in the country did, is they extended an olive branch to the legal market because that's what I-71 is. Like we can talk,
Yeah.
nicely or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's illegal to transport cannabis
Yeah.
into DC
Yeah.
and gift it, sell it, whatever you're gonna call it, right? And
Yeah.
they offered an olive branch, and some people took it up, some people didn't. That's a whole debate of like there were a bunch of reasons not to, right? Reasons to. And now we're seeing, 2 years later, into this transition, we're kind of seeing like we're coming down to like the end where like the city has really got to start enforcing on these operators, or like they are going to kind of drop their end of the bargain to the people they offered to like transition legally.
Yeah.
And we're really at the end of the I-71,
One.
like,
Yeah.
like it really is the end, which is
Yeah.
tragic in a lot of ways to a lot of people because this was a huge cultural phenomenon and moment and industry in DC.
I think you hit on it very well when you touched on the fact that it wasn't always what it became. Like
Yeah,
when it first started, it was, I don't want to say like genuine because that would make it imply that it was never genuine, but it was local. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? It was a lot of like locals participating in the market, and then once it got the reputation, that's when all of those other licensees and marketplace, like Cali, Oklahoma, various different other places started to come in and plant their flag, so to speak, and it blew out of proportion. So now that it has come to the end, it's like how many actual locals are the ones that got the transition opportunity, that olive branch, so to speak? How many are still around? You know what I mean? Because there's always going to be that argument as well. And like you said, it's not. I mean, you can only argue but so much. We all knew what we were participating in, but it's just all good things come to an end. So
absolutely, Buck.
how are they going about the reinforcement? They gave him a lot of time. It's about a year and a half.
So this was another thing that upset people. They gave at the end of 2020, well, end of 2023, beginning of 2024 last year, um,
Yeah,
they closed the unlicensed operator application period, and this was for
okay,
cultivators, retailers, and manufacturers. Anyone who's unlicensed, anyone who's an I-70 that want to come over. And they were supposed to have a safe harbor period that lasted through basically March of last year. and then it kept getting pushed back. But what was frustrating to
Yeah,
some people is they chose to transition early and open, and then this deadline kept getting pushed back. And let me be clear, there was only a safe harbor, aka no enforcement, for operators that chose to apply to ABCA. So this idea
right.
that anyone else who was operating I-71 was not technically legally exempt from enforcement, right?
Yeah, you're
And
not
this
even covered.
also Right, and this also did not protect anyone from federal enforcement. So we don't know what the feds have been watching,
Right.
right?
Yeah, the feds could be doing some of the
Right.
enforcement as well. We don't know.
We don't know what they've been watching. They have that 3-year, 4-year time frame, so we'll find out
Mhm.
when all those indictments come out. So, anyways, they kept kind of pushing this deadline back for ending gifting, and it was supposed to be much earlier than it ended up being. And now we're looking at March 31st as the deadline. If you applied as an unlicensed operator that was a retail person, and you're still gifting, you are not allowed to operate past March
March
31st. And
31st.
not only are you not allowed to operate, they're actually going to be taking people's licenses. And to be honest, a lot of people think that's fair because they've been given months, and there were a lot of people that were playing the game. So about it's going to look like about 30, maybe up to 40 of these unlicensed operators that applied will actually end up being transitioning. And there
So
was
if they apply, if they as long as they applied, are they safe from enforcement up until after the 31st, or do you have to have like passed a certain point? You have to have been awarded by this point.
So by the 31st, you have to be open. You don't even you can't have a
There's no,
placard. You
yeah,
can't
there's
have
no.
any extensions.
You have
However,
to have been approved. Everything.
however, Buck, ABCA has had like the weakest spine in like the universe of weakest spines. Um, and so like there's the reality of enforcing and there's what they say. And I've seen so many businesses get passes. I've seen so many businesses get enforced upon, and then all of a sudden they're getting a placard and they're getting a license. I don't really understand what's going on with the board. I don't think a lot of people do.
I don't think they want to, and I'm not gonna say they don't want to enforce because that, like, I know they want to do their job. I don't think they want to crash the market, and they don't have enough cultivators and processors online. They do have some processors, they do have some cultivators, but enough to like to supply the whole city to where it's not a shortage, and then they end up forcing everybody to the black market because there's no. I think they're trying to be as gracious as possible because they don't want they know what they're dealing with realistically.
I think you could be right, Buck, but at the end of the day, like when you tell people you got to transition, there has to be an end of the line, right?
Mm.
And because
Yeah,
you can play that game forever, and then no one's
right.
going to transition on the operator side. And so this whole idea of crashing the market, if you look at the actual number of registered patients and the patients that
Mhm.
will register, uh, like in the first month of shutting I-71 down. Well, let me back up. There's a few things. Shutting down like retail, like corners, brick and mortar I-71 stores is very different than shutting down the traditional market. I don't think they're going to be able to shut down the traditional market, since when has selling weed underground ever been able to be squashed? So this idea that you're going
Yeah.
to completely like remove people's option to buy weed, I don't think that's going to happen personally. And then on top of that, you do have to eventually end the I-71 market if you follow through with wanting to, make the legislation, like make it like basically come good on your word. And they did guarantee to unlicensed operators that transitioned, like they did guarantee them that this market would be ending, because otherwise why would they have transitioned, right? So
Yeah.
I think like the number of people that go to I-71 shops will pretty easily transition to either like the medical market or back to a more underground traditional market. And on top of that,
Mhm.
like we do have a large supply of weed, like in the medical market in DC, that is not being sold. Whether it's the same quality as the underground I-71,
Yeah.
I would argue it's not. I mean, you just have not had the innovation. Like, you can't get the same level of quality,
Variety.
or variety that you get on the traditional market, because you're shopping the whole
Yeah.
nation. You shop the traditional market, right? Um,
Yep.
and those shops have also had a wider product range to choose from, and they're also, their clients are more specific than necessarily a medical client will be, more picky. DC people are like the pickiest weed smokers. I
Yeah.
argue.
Very
And
finicky.
yeah, so I don't think the market's going to crash, and I agree that the regulators could have been trying to do that dance, but at the end of the day, like, you have to end this thing that happened, right? If you're a regulator, and if you're gonna hold true to what you said you were gonna do. So, I think that's what they're trying to do right now, and a lot of their moving deadlines put a lot of people in bad positions, and also like made a lot of confusion in the market and in the people that were transitioning. And so you have people that are trying to transition that are frustrated, who did transition, who are frustrated because these deadlines moved around. And like, you're talking about people with business plans worth millions of dollars that are trying to,
It's not cheap.
clean it
Yeah,
out.
it's
Yeah.
definitely not cheap. It's an expensive price tag over there.
Very. Yeah, have you
So
looked
that's
at
another
rental
thing.
rates for retail in in DC?
I have. It's in the millions.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's another obstacle. They gotta find investors. I understand some people say, well, y'all was making a whole bunch of money. Y'all should have something saved up, this, that, and the third. Well, easy come, easy go.
I think maybe we should talk about that too real quick. There's this misunderstanding that the cannabis industry is like, you make millions of dollars, and like those days are over, right? I mean, Buck, like
Yeah,
the days of like
prices down.
rolling. Yeah, like we all know the market, even the traditional market, went through a lot of changes over the last 5 years. And so that making it rich is really not a thing anymore. And even if you did have an I-71 shop, you made a lot of money, that goes away quick when you're trying to, keep a retail store
Keep a
open for,
business, yeah, 'cause now you
yeah,
got employees, you got security, you still have your overhead,
right.
and then gotta have all your yeah, it's not as lucrative as some people would
Yeah.
assume it to be.
Right. Yeah. So bottom line, in DC, we'll see what enforcement actually starts in March. They've been able to up the actual enforcement against non-applicants who are still gifting or selling weed in brick and mortars, and they're serious about it now. They're arresting people. Um,
They
most of
are.
the Yeah, which is a change. They weren't arresting people almost all of 2024 unless they had like a semi-automatic weapon or something. And they're now arresting people simply for having weed for intent to distribute marijuana, which is unfortunate.
All right, hold on. I'm trying to switch to my phone. This I gotta go plug this computer up.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time.
After some technical difficulties, we're back.
We're back.
So gotta love virtual. But we can talk about some of the differences between the Maryland market, the DC market, even the Virginia soon to be market. Obviously, they haven't really gotten up and running, so to speak. Since we were just touching on some of the DC enforcement and what have you, I'm on the Maryland side. You're more on the DC side as far as like I guess home base, so to speak. I can attest to some of the differences. Um, Maryland, I honestly think Maryland went wreck because Virginia went wreck. I don't
Really?
necessarily, yeah, I do. I say it all the time. I think it was like a less who can get fully up and running first can capitalize on the closeness of all three marketplaces because you could technically just drive to Virginia or Maryland or DC if you live in the metro area, and that'll be your variety. Um, so Maryland being medical, they only had a small knit um, market base. DC pretty much had the land, they had all of it because they were
MSI.
structured the way they were. And Virginia didn't have anything. So them flipping that switch in the middle of the night, going from nothing to wreck, I think incentivized Maryland to go wreck because they already had the infrastructure, and DC had to not DC, Virginia had to build the infrastructure before they could actually have a marketplace. And DC was starting to go through their post I-71 transition place. So it was like a little incentive. I personally think they'll say something a little different. But how do you feel about that? What do
Um,
you think Virginia has up their sleeve?
Buck, I think Virginia has nothing up their sleeve, unfortunately. The governor is in office till 2026, I think. And so
Yeah,
it really doesn't matter. They haven't
right.
proved to have the vote. So Virginia can have as much um, desire to go somewhere, but if you don't have the engine, right? If you don't have the
Mhm.
main part, it's kind of hard. And I could see. I honestly think Maryland's motivation to get to recreational probably, and I don't have any facts to back this up, but probably had more to do with MSOs than it did necessarily competing. I think, of course, it's self-interested, right? Like Maryland's making
Obviously.
millions of tax dollars off of the recreational market, but
Yeah,
Virginia does have a medical market. So if we're talking about infrastructure, Maryland is still setting up the social equity, like the retail recreational infrastructure. Like the dispensaries that have converted were medical. So Virginia
yeah.
does
They
have.
not.
Go ahead,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna
No,
say,
they.
yeah, Virginia does have medical cannabis. It's just very bad. It's very limited, right? It's very limited, but Virginia could, do the same thing Maryland did, and pass a bill that allowed their medical places to convert to recreational while the other licensees were processing and going through the setting up phase. We, I think, recently just had one of the first social equity licenses open up in Maryland. And that was a new one, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yeah,
obviously, yeah, but there's a lot more. Like, I think there were over 170 licenses awarded, and that was across cultivators,
yeah,
manufacturers, and retail. And we haven't seen most of those open up in Maryland, so it's going to be a long time. But they had a longer licensing period than DC did.
yeah.
So,
There's the same issues though. Funding and location,
mhm.
zoning, and all that kind of stuff. The ones that'll end up opening first will be the retail though.
Yeah,
That's pretty much across the board. That's the easiest thing to open up in the industry. It gets taxed heavy. It's under 280E, but it's the easiest to establish. Cultivation and processing takes significantly more money.
yeah.
Uh,
I,
but
I
the MSOs and the MSOs definitely lobby for the recreational use being in Maryland as well. It's not most of the licensees in Maryland are MSOs. How many of them are actually local Maryland bred, Maryland born license holders?
very few,
Not a
and
lot.
yeah, and that's another obstacle actually too to these social equity licensees that are trying to get in the market is you have all of these MSOs who had the money already, who had the
Right.
infrastructure, that now have almost a 2-year head start on any other legal recreational dispensary that could open up. And that's I don't know how you catch up. I don't think you can. And the DC market actually is looking at that as a benefit, even though we're struggling right now, that we actually could potentially in our legal market have better weed than Maryland because it is MSOs. And we, even though we have big money starting to come into the cannabis, it's
Yeah.
still a small market that Columbia Care, which was the only MSO that was in um, District Cannabis is an MSO because it
District
operates in
Cannabis.
both DC and Maryland, but
But
it's not
it's
typical
yeah,
MSO, right?
it's levels to MSOs.
Right. So we're talking Columbia Care level, which has operations across the East Coast. They withdrew from DC. They sold their licenses. So DC is actually, even though it's not doing well.
Columbia Care left DC
Yep. Hmm.
and they didn't leave Maryland. That's interesting.
Well, that tells you a little bit about the market in DC. They were making
Unfair
money, right?
competition.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so hopefully for the DC market, they're looking at like, hey, if we can get some of these Maryland customers to come, even though they have to register as medical patients in DC, if we can get them, if we can grow good enough weed, even if it's legal, medical, it's tested, even if it's on more expensive side, maybe we can beat out the quality of the heavily saturated MSO market in Maryland.
And I think that's part of the issue. I don't think people want to self register. I don't think anyone wants to go get registered to go purchase. That's probably going to be one of the biggest hurdles of retaining customer base, so to speak. People just don't want to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you,
Um,
Buck. I don't think you
but that-
retain I-71 market customers into medical market, if that makes any sense. I think there's some that will convert, but I don't think you can look at that pool at all and think that it will anywhere remotely transition to the legal market in DC.
yeah, and the faster they kind of come to that understanding, I think the faster they'll be willing to move forward with just turning it all around to what it's going to be. Because it's a big difference. But
Yeah, I agree.
quality wise, Maryland definitely needs to step up. They are very MSO minded. Um, the social equity licensees would be the hope in trying to like shift the direction of the market, so to speak, with the variety and what have you. But from what I've heard and seen and talked to people about, for the most part, it's just like they have their system in place that they are comfortable with their bottom line. And it's like the money's coming, so they're not incentivized to change their views on how they would like to um, run their businesses. Like it works, so why break it? Uh, Change anything. We don't really need to conform, so to speak. We're looking for plants to turn around in 8 weeks. They're not looking for a bunch of flavor. They're not looking for a bunch of different grow styles or what have you.
Mm,
They're growing too much of stuff that's not great. So I think some of their grows are too big, and they don't necessarily have the proper personnel. They just not, it's not really run the best way on a large scale
yeah.
surface. I think if they scale it down a little bit and have more of a mom, I'm not gonna say mom and pop. You just need to try new stuff, more or
But
less. It's a whole lot of, huh?
yeah, I agree with you, Buck. And the problem is right now there's no incentive for them.
Incentive.
I mean,
Yeah,
they're
it's no
making a ton of
incentive.
money, right? And we're going into, even if it hasn't hit a definable recession yet, people don't have money right now. I mean, you know that. I've talked to business owners in the traditional market and the legal market in DC, and people are spending even less money. Like the weed market's been contracting over the last years, anyways. And so sometimes like people will go to an MSO because if they can get cheap weed, it's better than nothing, and they don't have
Yeah,
to spend on living soil, organic, all that, and that's really unfortunate. And the MSOs aren't gonna convert out of the kindness of their heart. They're about the bottom line 100%, so they're not gonna
and
just
that's
start
a
growing.
misconception too within itself. Is like to grow organically costs more money. That's a misconception.
Totally.
It's actually cheaper to grow organically. You're gonna pay your money up front, but once you get your system set, you're gonna spend way less money growing organically than you would be to keep buying cheap bottles over and over and over and over to replace them. That's another misnarrative. But that's part of like the business part of the industry. It's like everybody gotta get paid. So the bottle nutrient industry itself is part of the MSO mindset.
Yeah, totally. Hmm.
system. Yeah, so like you said, no incentive to do anything different is going to end up with the same thing. It's like an oversaturated market. So I don't know how that's going to play out. What about these sales from February for the DC medical market? That's trending upward, or are they kind of like going down
So
a little bit?
So, according to some information that came out of a stakeholders meeting that I was not invited to because they have not released the numbers yet, but they're
Okay.
actually looking better. So, according to the meeting that happened, it was this week, a few days ago. I think it was a couple $100,000 increase in sales. Let me pull this up. Yeah, so retail rose a couple $100,000, and it was, I think, overall about over $500,000 more than January. And this is really good news because DC has been adding dispensaries, medical dispensaries on, and our like revenue has not been increasing market wide. So you can imagine that just means that every store is getting a smaller percentage of the same pie.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so we're looking at now probably almost 10 new dispensaries came on in January and February, and that's finally resulting in a little bit of an increase of sales. I would argue it still is not looking very good if you're splitting 300K more over five different dispensaries.
yeah,
That's not a lot, right? That means that someone's losing somewhere still. But it's a better sign than we have had. So we've had some really rough months, and any increase is good. It's still nowhere near what it was like before Maryland legalized recreational use, adult use, but it has seen a little bit of an increase. And February is a shorter month too, so
right. I was about to say it's like it takes time for those numbers to come in, but also that's a shorter month for revenue sales, and then it's coming on the heels of holidays where people have been like spending a little
mhm.
more than they should have. So for those numbers to be up, that's a sign.
Yeah,
That's a
it's
sign.
definitely a good sign
I expect the sales to be back up a little bit more as the warmer months come. I mean, that also depends on how this economy goes with our new
with our new head of chief.
yeah,
I know.
our new our new president and his co-president tag team partners. But
Yeah, I know.
typically, I think it'll the warmer months people are festive, so I expect them to go up, and then you'll have a few more licensees on board, a couple of the new licensees and processors and stuff, they'll have started to catch their footing a little bit. So it's just a trend.
I agree with you. It would
It's like,
take, even if it's not as much as usual, who knows what this president is going to do, but it would take him a lot to completely change the normal like ebb and flow of weed sales throughout the year, and they usually
yeah,
do go up when tax returns
yeah.
hit and everything.
And when people are stressed out, they needed something, they need something to help relieve their problems.
They
So
need
that
their
should
medicine.
drive sales, if anything else.
Totally.
If anything else, like the importance, we could talk about the importance of local media. There's not a lot of we kind of touched on this earlier, but it's not a whole lot of people with like their feet on the ground reading these legislations, going to these meetings. Like you said, it was just a shareholders meeting. Um, how often does what is it a actor? How do you pronounce it?
ABCA.
ABCA
ABCA.
ABCA. How often do they have their press releases or their briefings and things of that nature?
So they don't have any press briefings technically. Like they have press releases that come out when they decide to, and it's usually about enforcement or like license, medical license, expiration period changing or whatever.
Mm.
So they have public meetings pretty much weekly. that depends.
So the
Sometimes
public
it can
can,
change, but yeah, they're online actually. So those are public meetings. But there's other ANC. There's other public meetings throughout DC that also happen. But yeah, it's about weekly bucks, so it can happen pretty often.
that's what people need to take advantage of. A lot of this stuff be right in front of them. They just don't necessarily know about it. Or, I mean, I do the same thing on the Maryland side, so I know exactly like the stuff that people don't really take account for. But like these meetings they have, it's not just about cannabis. They have meetings about pretty much about anything in the city, and it's all public information, right? Where they can find the stuff online, or do they have to contact their local? Who's like, where do they find out this information on the DC side?
Yeah, so I don't mean to plug us, but we're actually the best place to find that information. The ABCA website is notoriously difficult to navigate, and much like MCA's website. And
They
so,
don't say a whole lot. They say they're supposed to say a lot, but they don't really say a whole lot. You gotta
right.
dig.
Yeah, exactly. They make it purposely, I'm convinced, difficult to find the information you're looking for, right? And so, actually, if you subscribe to the Outlaw Reports newsletter, we put in the weekly meeting information. We put where to watch it. We put
Mm.
the agenda. We try to do that with Maryland too, as often as we can. Maryland just has less meetings. I don't know if you found that, Buck, but there's not a whole lot of public things going on in Maryland, unfortunately.
They have meetings in Maryland about cannabis when a bill is brought up or
Right.
suggested. When they introduce something, that's when they'll have it. Um, and that's typically between January. Well, I'll say they'll submit the bills for the year in the ending months of the previous year. So, like the cannabis bill they just put in, they attempted to pass for this year. They put them in around October, November-ish, and they will be on the docket for January moving forward, and they're trying to get it either approved or denied by April,
Hmm.
so that it could go into effect typically around the summer. So I assume DC has like a similar. Well, no, y'all
We're a
have a
little
lot more going on,
Yeah,
so
we're
we
a little
don't. Yeah,
yeah. We have emergency legislation. Also, all of our legislation has to get approved by Congress, right? So there's no
yeah, yeah.
set legislative period in DC. I mean, there's the typical one, but we have had emergency legislation year round for the cannabis industry in DC, and that goes up in front of the council whenever it's ready. And we've had, I want to say, almost five emergency legislation bills passed. And that's a loophole that basically
Man,
allows DC to pass legislation for a temporary period before it gets approved by Congress and enact it. But anything that actually goes into the DC bill, like code, that has to get
yeah,
approved by Congress, and it has to get not approved by Congress. So if Congress doesn't act during a certain period of time, it gets automatically approved. But it does give them a chance. Congress can pass a bill to basically end our our bill.
yeah, block
um,
it.
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting as hell. That's yeah. It's tricky navigational waters right there.
Yeah.
It's, I have a lot more going on than we do, so I would assume y'all have a lot more sessions.
Yeah, yeah. But to go to your point of like the importance of like local media and everything, I always like to break this down to like I think like Instagram is so important. I think individual podcasters are so important, but journalism is really diverse in its like angles, but like traditional journalism, which is what we do, is really it's different, right? Like it's very different
Yeah,
what we do and the level of standard we have for publishing stuff and also vetting information. And so you have like really great, Instagram accounts that are kind of publishing more like rumors and hearsay, and that's great.
yeah,
But like as a news outlet, we are not allowed to do that. Like we get sued for
right.
that. And also to just back it up a little bit, like I always like to say like I'm trained as a journalist, right? So my training is more in line with like law school and like an investigator and like a a investigative like position, whether it's in the legal space or with the police department. And
Yeah,
so I have to really check my information out. And this is something that I'm over 6 years into doing. I've done it at a national level. I've done it with really big stories like criminal justice stories, with prison investigations. And so the level of quality or like requirements I have for information I hear and stories I'm publishing is much higher than like you would see on an Instagram. And it doesn't mean those things don't have their place, but it's important that people know that, right? Because what you read on Instagram from an Instagram account is not necessarily
it's not verified.
it's not verified, right? And people also
Yeah,
often just read something and they're like, "Oh, this is the truth," right? Whereas if
yeah,
you're reading an article from the Outlaw Report, I have to have something to back up every sentence that I write, because
yeah,
we could get sued, one, but also two, like the process of me publishing an article and vetting any information is to make sure it's true. And I have to do that through calling sources. I have to ask people for comment. We, recently came out with a story that was a DOJ press release, right? So the Department of Justice indicted a DC dispensary owner for almost $1 million of tax evasion. Part of my process, though, is I don't just read the press, release. I also have to try to make an effort to contact that person, or contact someone that can contact them, right?
contact them, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say like an interesting, um, most interesting thing that's arisen from this reporting process recently is we've had all this enforcement happening. And I report on that, but I also reach out to some of the dispensary owners that are getting padlocked. And what they're saying is interesting, right? Like some of them are saying that the amount of products that they're receiving is not, or they had, is not the
You're
amount that
reporting.
APA is claiming. It's heavily inflated.
That's typical practice, though. It's always been the case. If you get caught with back in the day, you used to get caught with a dime or a dub bag. They would say it was an ounce.
Right.
That's
Somehow it got
typical police
added.
standard practice.
Yeah, for sure, right? And then
But I believe it.
everything that we put in the Outlaw Report has to be attributed to someone. And like we can't anonymously put stuff in there. So someone can't call me and say some bullshit and me publish
And
it,
then
right?
you just post it.
Right. And so in that sense, like we talked a little bit about at the beginning, but like it's important for us to also hold our community accountable and like the rumor mill accountable, right? So like
Yeah. Mhm.
people are telling me stuff, but if you're not reading it in our report, if don't assume that I'm not like I haven't heard about it, right? Like there's a
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Somebody that said something.
yeah.
But how willing are people to talk? And because like they might not look. I mean, I don't know. People don't really like talking to journalists, or they're looking at you kind of like, I don't know, the police, maybe, maybe
Oh,
not.
totally,
How
like a
often,
snitch.
yeah, like the snitch and all that kind of. But how willing are people to talk to you and share information, or like maybe not share information, but like give their side of the story
Yeah, Buck, that's a great
in this
question.
news?
I think like this is really the responsibility of each individual journalist to build relationships and trust. And I'm really
Yeah,
lucky that I have very strong boundaries. Like most information I get's off record, and that means I can't even bring it up to anyone, even if it's anonymously, right? So that goes
mhm,
into like a black box in my head. So I know about it, but so I have people calling me, texting me all the time. And people know in our community now that if they tell me stuff, that doesn't mean it automatically ends up in the wrong hands. Like they can trust me with the
yeah,
guidelines, and I've established trust. And I think that people do understand, like, at the Outlaw, we have to report on closures. Like we're not on one side or the other. We're not on the legal or the illegal or unlicensed or, licensed market either side. But
that's
we do have to,
honorable.
yeah, yeah, but we do have to report on both things. Like we can't ignore malpractice by the dispensaries. We can't
Yeah,
ignore malpractice by the I-71 community. And a lot of times each one thinks that they're the better one and thinks that they're on a throne, right? And it's like,
yeah,
y'all
yeah,
love Hunter. And our job as
yeah.
journalists is to have no friends and to report on all that. But with that being said, I think we've we are really lucky. We have a strong community. I think people trust our ability to tell news, to report it, and through my last 3 years with the Outlaw, I think I've been able to establish a pretty good amount of trust through the community. So they do feel like they can call us and tell me things. We would love to have more resources to report more, but that's the struggle with local media.
I think it's not just not really well. Like you said, I-71 is over with. It'll change. It's gonna be more soap operas moving forward. Then more like before it was more like the Sopranos. Now it's just gonna be like a soap opera.
Buck, I thought it was already like a soap opera.
It was like but it was like it was like the hood soap opera. So now it's gonna be like a corporate soap opera.
Yeah, but it was funny is some of these corporate people well, they all like to pretend to be hood. So it still comes sometimes
Yeah,
it still can be a little hood, but it's funny, it's like the worst parts of being hood and like not the good parts. So like any street, values
yeah.
or like
It's
respect,
no
like that's out the
honorable.
window. They
It
don't
ain't
count that.
honorable at all. It's all sleaze bag shit.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
No,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
I was trying to sit back and watch them go back and forth about it, man. But I appreciate you coming on, man. I definitely appreciate the old school journalism aspect you bring to it. 'Cause I'm not, and I'm old. I don't really want to date myself, but I'm old enough to remember when like journalism and all that was like the only way you got your news in your teeth, so to speak. So I definitely respect everything y'all do, and I feel like it's gonna get a lot juicier moving forward. But as far as y'all being held to a higher regard than like typical um, media or what have you, everything in the cannabis industry is held to a higher regard than anything else. So
Totally.
that's just I wish it wasn't like that, but it feels like they make us do everything 3, 4, 5 times bigger, badder, you know what I'm saying? More
Yeah,
diligently than anything else. So
absolutely, Buck.
it's part of the game. But I appreciate you coming on, chopping it up with me, man. Anything else you want to let these people know where they could go to subscribe to get your newsletter? Anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, so we would love everyone to come check us out at outlawreport.com. Give us a subscription or a subscribe. If you have a couple dollars to spend a month, we'd really appreciate it. We're trying to raise enough money to keep going. And we know that we're
Yeah,
important to the community and we come up often, but we do have to have that support back. And we haven't necessarily been able to hit our goals yet, which is going to impact how we can serve our weed community.
it's a business.
It is a business at the end of the day,
It's
but
a business.
yeah, but we really appreciate you having us on, and it's great to talk to you, and great to know that there's someone keeping an eye on the Maryland situations as well, and hopefully we'll
Yes.
be able to come back in person.
Yeah, yeah, gotta get you over here. Oh, yeah. How those puppies?
Oh, they're good.
Puppies doing good?
Yeah, we adopted out all 10 that we adopted out, and then the other two that we kept they're growing great. And the mom, she had bad mastitis, but it's healed up, so that's good.
All right,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Glad to
So
hear it. Glad to hear it. We'll put the link down below. Y'all make sure to check out the Outlaw Report. Like, comment, subscribe. Go show us some love. And if you got a couple dollars, go ahead and donate to the cause, man, because I know y'all be watching and reading the articles. Y'all just don't be like do it from the silent. You know what I'm saying? Get
I
in the game.
know, I know, Buck. But we
Get in
get
the
it.
game.
Times are tough for everyone, so we understand. But yeah,
This too
anything
shall
helps.
pass.
Hmm.
But yeah, appreciate you. We had some technical difficulty, but we made it through. So shout out to LJ.
Thanks, Buck. We appreciate you, and we'll talk soon.
All right, catch y'all on the next episode, man. We out.